today for our Lunch and Learn series. Today we have an exciting conversation on divesting our state pension funds from fossil fuel interests. And with the concern that we're not moving fast enough to reduce carbon emissions as soon as possible, this is such a key topic to really talk about. So we have been looking at every tactic to keep fossil fuel industry accountable, and the best way to do it right now is to hit them where it hurts the most, and that is their pocketbook. And today you're going to get a chance to hear from advocates who have been leading the charge to get our state to divest our pensions away from fossil fuels. And you also hear from the chief ESG officer from the city of New York where this tactic has been implemented, and we will take some time to answer questions you all may have. As you all may see, we have a Q&A function, so feel free to drop questions in there. We have some people on the line who are going to be able to answer questions as we go. We have plenty of advocates who have a lot of experience, and we will highlight important questions at the end. But before we turn it over to the panelists, I want to introduce someone who has been a strong advocate for us on so many environmental issues. She's the chief sponsor of this particular bill. Without further ado, I would love to turn it over to State Senator Adriane Johnson.
Thank you, Danny. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Adriane Johnson, State Senator of the 30th Legislative District, and I really appreciate having our time to discuss Senate Bill 130, the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act. And so again, thank you, Danny, thank you, Hannah, and the Illinois Environmental Council for hosting the Lunch and Learn. And thank you to the members of the Climate Safe Pension Coalition, Kathy, Jack, and John, and others who are on the call for your Herculean efforts to help Illinois decarbonize our pension plans. I appreciate your diligence over the last 3 sessions as we continue to work and advance this timely and important legislation. I want to also thank Leader Will Guzzardi, the House sponsor, and all of our colleagues in the General Assembly who are co-sponsors and who will help us get this legislation to the finish line. I also want to thank, I know John Adler, he's the chief ESG officer, as Danny mentioned, from the city of New York. He'll be on later on as well to present. So why am I sponsoring, and we are sponsoring Senate Bill 130, and why does it matter? As all of you know, climate change is a real and serious threat to the health and welfare and prosperity of Illinoisans. There is considerable scientific data that indicates that maintaining the status quo of fossil fuel energy production will lead to catastrophic results. We believe that continued investment in fossil fuel industry is counterproductive to the goals set forth in our nation-leading climate bills laws that we have on the books, which commits the state to phasing out carbon emissions from energy and transport and sectors and industry in Illinois, and making sure that Illinois is 100% reliant on renewable energy by 2050. We must decarbonize our pension plans because continued investment in fossil fuel companies poses unacceptable risks to the long-term sustainability of the state's public pension funds. Why should we decarbonize our pension plans? There are 3 and possibly even more important reasons why we should do that. 1, we must protect retirement savings from client-related financial risks. 2, it is imperative that we capitalize on the investment opportunities in a low carbon economy. And 3, and again, there's more reasons, but we've heard from thousands of Illinoisans that this is a priority. In the last decade, the fossil fuel sector has generally underperformed compared to a broadly diversified market index. Several studies analyzing major US public pension funds found that we could have been saved billions, made billions of dollars, enriched the plans if they have divested in fossil fuels a decade prior. So demonstrating that divestment can lead to a better comparable return. Investing in these companies result in financial risk to our pension plan. That's the core principle behind why we're advancing Senate Bill 130. And Jack and Kathy and others, they'll go into the specific details about it, but at a high level, it would require divestment in publicly traded fossil fuel companies. And these are investment by pension funds, would prohibit any top 100 publicly traded oil, gas company with the largest fossil fuel reserves, and the top companies in the coal industry as well. And just a note, Senate Bill 130 will not prohibit investment in companies that have their core business in construction or operations of fossil fuels, infrastructure or exploration, extraction, refining, processing, or distributing um, fossil fuel. So in closing, our pension funds and trustees have a fiduciary obligation to safeguard the pensions for both our current and future retirees. We believe that the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act is a prudent measure which will align with the goals expressed in our nation-leading Climate and Equitable Job Act and other laws. By aligning our goals that's expressed in CJUP and other laws in Illinois, Illinois is cementing its role as a leader in protecting our workers and our community from the climate crisis. And with that, it is my pleasure. I believe that Leader Grizzardi is on. Are you on, Leader? He's going to make a few
Yes.
remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have too much to add. Senator Johnson really covered it in a pretty comprehensive way. My name is Will Gazzardi. I'm the state rep from the 39th district, which is on the northwest side of Chicago, in neighborhoods like Bucktown, Logan Square, Avondale, Hermosa, and Belmont Cragen. Um, Senator Johnson really gave a pretty comprehensive overview of the bill and why it's important. But to me, it's pretty straightforward. We have set very ambitious climate goals for this state through legislation, some of the most ambitious goals in this country. And it is, there is no reason that we should be working against ourselves. We shouldn't be taking tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in state investments and spending those dollars to support the fossil fuel industry. It's undermining those very goals that we set for our state, right? It's just so counterproductive for us to say we're pushing for a clean energy future and we're also investing our state's pension funds in those very companies that are profiting from continuing to extract fossil fuels from the ground. That's those two efforts are just running, in conflict with each other. And it's really important that we align our investment strategies with our stated climate and energy goals. And that's all that this bill does. This bill just says, let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's put our investment dollars behind our policy goals. Let's align our state's fiduciary policy with its energy and climate policy. So I think it's going to enable us to really supercharge our efforts to green our energy sector and green our economy and grow our economy. And Senator Johnson already said it, but this is a smart investment, right? We're not asking the state to throw its money out the window. Investing in climate safe pension funds will yield better returns for our retirees. It'll provide a safer retirement future for the people who work for the state. So it's a win-win. I really believe very deeply in this initiative, and it's going to be a tough one to get over the finish line. It's going to require a lot of persuasion, explanation, and advocacy in order to get my colleagues on board. And that's why I think we're here today, gathered to learn more about this initiative, but really also to activate you all in the effort to make this happen. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to hearing the discussion from the panelists today.
Okay, well, Leader Gazzardi, Senator Johnson, thank you so much for your leadership in this. Really thankful to have strong environmental leaders who are helping us drive the message down here in Springfield. And we really appreciate your time and effort on this. And for everyone else on the call, once again, I want to note that we do have a Q&A function at the bottom. So as our presenters are speaking, questions come up, feel free to use that. We have people on the call that will be able to answer that. But now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who's been a leader on the ground, who is a volunteer in many aspects and just is always rolling up her sleeves to make sure that we're talking about important things that will help improve our community and bring relief to a lot of people throughout the state. She is a leader within Climate Safe Pensions, Illinois, which is a statewide coalition of faith, environmental, and community organizations that are working towards this goal of making fossil-free pensions here in Illinois. So, without further ado, I would love to introduce Kathy Tolan to take us away.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take a second to share my screen, and you can get started. And I want to thank our sponsors, Senator Johnson and Representative Guzzardi, for giving an incredibly good summary of what this bill is and what it's all about. What you're going to hear me do for the next few minutes is elaborate some on the points that they have already made about why this is really important, and to share information about what little more information about what this bill would do and how we can make it happen. So with that, I am happy to launch into this as well. We're very excited to have John Adler with us from the Comptroller's office in the city of New York, and he's going to be giving us some more detail on what their experience has been as well. So as has been said already, this effort has been spearheaded outside the legislature by Climate Safe Pensions Illinois, which is a statewide coalition that came together specifically for the purpose of moving our fossil fuel investments out of our state pension systems. The lead organizations in the coalition include Third Act Illinois, 350 Chicago, and the Climate Reality Project Chicago. And we've got members of our coordinating committee here who may assist in answering some questions later as well. As we've said, this is endorsing organizations, and coalition partners include environmental groups, faith organizations, labor interests, and others. And as our sponsors have already indicated, we are pursuing this path because we believe that it is a win for across the board. It is a win for state workers, it is a win for taxpayers, and it's a win for our planet. So as we've already said, the legislation is the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act. It is a bill pending in the General Assembly that would divest Illinois state pensions funds from the 200 oil, gas, and coal companies with the largest carbon reserves globally. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So why? I know I don't have to tell you all about global warming and climate change, but there's a few things we should just reinforce in our minds here. First, as we know, the world's warming quickly. Okay? We know we're collectively on track to exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade of the increased temperature. We know that every fraction of a degree that we do or don't warm the planet makes a substantial difference in climate-related impacts. And we know that once we go beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade, scientists warn there will be multiple tipping points that will accelerate those impacts. And we know that climate change is affecting Illinois. A startling example of that is that between 1980 and 2024, we experienced 128 confirmed major weather events that had $1 billion or more in losses. It's kind of astounding in and of itself. But more so, between 1980 and 2000, there were an average of one per year. However, in the 2020s, we've had an average of 8 per year, and in 2024, we had 12 weather events in Chicago in Illinois, with at least $1 billion in damages. So we can see just, out our back door practically, some of the impacts of warming temperatures. And we also, 5 years ago, the International Energy Agency warned us that in a net zero world, there is no need for new fossil fuel supply, and that expansion of current supply is really incompatible with Paris climate goals. However, fossil fuel producers, we see, are currently working hard to expand and not contract their efforts. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars exploring for gas and oil fields. As this slide indicates, just 20 of the world's biggest oil and gas companies are projected to spend $932 billion between 2022 and 2030, developing new oil and gas fields. And the projections for new capacity are growing, not shrinking as we move forward, as we go forward. This level of expansion is on track to far exceed the production levels that are consistent with limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And at the same time, while they invest heavily in new sources of fossil fuels, fossil fuel companies are not investing. They are doing very, very little to invest in non-fossil fuel technologies. And while clean energy investments overall do actually exceed fossil fuel investments by more than 2 times, oil and gas companies represent only 1.5% of that investment. So these companies are clearly, literally fueling the climate crisis. Now, as we've already said in the introduction here, in this environment, the state of Illinois has taken a dramatically different approach and is helping to lead the country in promoting clean energy. We know these things, so I'm not going to talk about them long, but this is represented most directly by these 2 pieces of historic legislation. The Climate and Energy Jobs Act, CEJA, passed in 2021. And as we know, it not only has a goal of 100% carbon-free power by 2045, it's putting in place the mechanisms and the programs and across the government and across the state that it's going to make it possible to do that, to create the jobs and to share the benefits of that across the entire state. And just this year, the addition of CERJA, the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act, will create the infrastructure that we need to support a clean energy future. So these, as we've said already, these major initiatives of the state of Illinois make us a leader nationally in committing to a fossil-free future. But we can do more, and we need to do more, because while we're investing state funds to develop robust clean energy benefits, we are investing our pension funds in the companies that are expanding fossil fuel investments and working at cross purposes to our state priorities, undermining our state priorities in many ways, as our legislators have explained to us already today. So, as it turns out, pension funds are major investors in the fossil fuel industry. Nearly 30% of fossil fuel industry shares are held by pension funds. Worldwide, that's some $46 trillion in fossil fuel assets. So we're talking big money across the board in the relation of pension funds to fossil fuels. And we know, we've already established, I think, that fossil fuel investments don't support the policy goals of the state of Illinois, and that they contribute to increasing the temperature of the planet. It is just as important to talk about fossil fuels as a financial investment. And fossil fuel investments are a particularly problematic investment for pension funds. I'm going to talk briefly about a few of the ways that that's true. So, fossil fuel investments, volatile and inconsistent. Once upon a time, and for a very long time, fossil fuel investments were a classic blue chip solid bet for returns, for growth, and for security. It's why pension funds invested in them. But that's changing and has changed. Over the last 10 years, the fossil fuel sector has seen the highest volatility of any of the S&P sectors. And on top of that volatility, prices jumping up and down, fossil fuel stocks have overall underperformed the S&P 500 in 7 of the last 10 years. So let's see for a minute what that looks like. This graph shows total returns for the past 10 years, 2015 to 2025, starting with a $10,000 invested in one of 3 ways. Overall, investments in the fossil fuel energy sector, the yellow line, well underperformed the overall S&P 500, which is the black line. If we were to look at the overall S&P 500 minus the fossil fuel sector, which is the blue line, it outperformed the overall S&P. This is generally true even through the high fuel prices and high oil company profits that we saw during 2022 and 2023 when the bounce back from COVID and the invasion of Ukraine caused major fuel shortages and much higher profits from in oil companies. But as you can see, that $10,000 that you started with in 2015, you would want it to be in that blue line, the portfolio without fossil fuel investments. So these performance results can have very major impacts on fossil pension fund finances. One way of quantifying this is to look at what would have happened if a fund had not invested in fossil fuels over this period. So there's 2 research studies relevant here that were done in 2023 that looked at this and found similar results. The University of Waterloo looked at a group of 6 state public pension funds and found that they would collectively be $21 billion richer in 2022 if they had divested in 2013. And a second study, specifically of the Colorado Public Pension Fund, found that they would have been $2.7 billion ahead if they had dropped fossil fuels from their portfolio over the same period. And by the way, for this and other research that we cite in this presentation, you can find references and more information on our website, which we'll also give you later and it's probably in the chat. So in addition to poor performance and volatility, currently, fossil fuel companies face growing structural risks that make them unfavorable and more risky investment prospects going into the future. These include growing competition as renewable alternatives grow and become cheaper, growing scrutiny by, say, credit rating agencies, through growing numbers of lawsuits for climate-related damages and a number of other constraints. And they face growing vulnerability from fluctuating prices, from global instability, and from the same climate-related impacts that we see impacting so many other things, and potentially stranded assets and infrastructure. So this combination, high volatility, underperformance, structural risks that threaten the future, really combine to make fossil fuels a particularly risky investment choice for our pension funds. And now I'm happy to introduce John Adler of New York City, Office of the Comptroller, who will give us a real example of how New York City divested from its pension funds and what happened when they did. Once he's done, I will be back to review the specific provisions of our bill in Illinois.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate the invitation to be here with you to share the experience that we've had in New York City on fossil fuel divestment. I've been in this job in the Comptroller's office for 4 years. I spent the previous 7 years as head of the New York City Mayor's Office of Pensions and Investments, where I was the mayor's trustee on the boards of the 5 New York City pension funds. And I spent most of my career before that working for SEIU, where I started working on pensions and investment issues about 25 years ago. Next slide, please. So the controller is investment advisor, custodian, and a trustee of New York City's public pension funds, which have over $300 billion in assets to provide retirement benefits to the city's teachers, cops, sanitation workers, and other public employees. In 2018, 3 of the 5 funds, representing about 75% of the assets, voted to study whether there was a path to prudently divest from publicly traded fossil fuel reserve owners in order to mitigate the risk that those companies and the pension funds face from climate change. They took this action because they had been learning about the effects of climate change for a number of years, had been hearing from climate advocates, and believed that their fiduciary duty demanded that they take the necessary action to both insulate their investment portfolios and do their part in keeping the planet below that 1.5-degree warming threshold. So the question often arises about divestment versus engagement. The New York City boards do not believe this is a question of either or, but rather both and. They believe that divesting from fossil fuel reserve owners made more sense than engaging them, partly because of years of futile engagement with them. Asking a fossil fuel company like Exxon or Chevron to get out of the fossil fuel business is kind of like asking Starbucks to stop selling coffee. Engagement has its place, and we do a lot of engagement, especially among companies where there is a pathway to decarbonization that makes business sense. But in sectors where engagement is futile and where the risks are such that there's no way to mitigate them, then divestment can be the right fiduciary path to take. So after an extensive process that we took that over 2 years and included conducting a request for information, then a request for proposals, in January 2020, the boards selected, excuse me, BlackRock and Makita as consultants to study fossil fuel divestment and report back to the boards. Next slide, please. Sorry, we're one slide back. We went too far. Yeah, okay.
This is,
I think I missed the slide. There was a study outcome slide. All right, well, let's not worry about the slide. I'm not going to talk about this slide at the moment. You can just leave it up there. So the consultants conducted, you already know what the end is here that we divested. So there's no there's no thriller endings. You got the spoiler alert. The consultants conducted comprehensive studies of the fund's public equity and corporate bonds portfolios, how to define fossil fuel reserve owners and the risks they posed, and what other pension funds were doing to address those risks. And then they made recommendations to the boards on how they could prudently divest from fossil fuel reserve owners consistent with their fiduciary duties. The recommendations they made found that carrying out such a divestment would be likely to reduce the fund's risk or volatility. And Kathy spoke earlier about how volatile the fossil fuel securities are without reducing their investment returns. As Kathy said, oil and gas had the lowest risk-adjusted returns for every time period over the previous decade leading up to the study, and that remains true today. If you look at 1, 3, 5, 10-year returns, fossil fuels bottoms out the sectors in the equity indexes. These funds, as with all pension funds, are highly diversified, meaning that the exclusion of these securities would be unlikely to meaningfully reduce the diversification of the funds or reduce their efficient frontier. So diversified investors seek to achieve a asset allocation to get to the efficient frontier, which is the most reward per unit of risk. And so this divestment wasn't going to reduce that level of return per unit of risk that the pension funds could expect to achieve with their portfolios. By executing the divestment gradually rather than all at once, they could minimize their transaction costs. So these findings and approaches would apply just as much to all diversified pension funds as they do to the New York City funds. So in January 2021, each of the 3 boards that commissioned the studies voted to exclude the securities of fossil fuel reserve owners. Index fund managers were directed to optimize the post-divestment portfolios to minimize tracking error. and active managers retain discretion about how to redeploy the assets from the divestment consistent with their strategy. All right, so now I'm coming to this slide, and you can see the annual returns of the three boards that divested from fossil fuels since they took that vote really, they took the vote in fiscal year 22. So these are the 3 years in which we've got returns since the divestment started. So let me just say, it's difficult to specify that the divestment helped or hurt returns over this period, since so many factors go into a diversified portfolio's performance. But suffice it to say that in these 3 years since the vote, all three have substantially outperformed their 7% assumed rate of return, which protects the members in the funds and the taxpayers of New York City who are contributing to fund the members' pensions. Their performance has also been in line with that of the 2 New York City pension funds that did not divest from fossil fuels. But each board has its own asset allocation, its own investment policy, and roster of managers. So it's difficult to make a true apples to apples comparison. But the point is, the divestment did not negatively impact returns. And this is a 3-year period. Obviously, we're all long-term investors. We have pension obligations extending out decades, as do the pension funds in the state of Illinois. But for the 3 years since we've done it, the outcomes are very positive. The funds have not incurred additional costs from divestment other than the de minimis transaction costs from selling the securities, and all of their public equity and corporate bond accounts are customized separate accounts. So directing the managers to exclude each fund's list of excluded securities did not increase their fees. Now, let me just say, divestment was not the end of the work of the New York City pension funds to address the risks of climate change. The board subsequently set goals to achieve net zero emissions in their portfolios by 2040, with a focus on creating real-world decarbonization. They do this by engaging with portfolio companies to decarbonize, by setting ambitious goals for investments in climate solutions, such as renewable energy, and by requiring all of their asset managers to have their own decarbonization plans focused on engagement with the portfolio companies in their portfolios. At the bottom here, you see the link to our website where you can find copies of the fund's net zero plans and annual climate reports. And I'll conclude by saying that I think any diversified pension fund could benefit from the steps the New York City pension funds have taken on divestment and climate action more broadly. And the more investors do it, the greater benefit all of us will gain. And I'll conclude there and happy to answer any questions that might come up.
Great. Thank you so much, John. It's great to be able to point to a real life example of what happens and how this can be done. So you've heard about New York City. We can and we should do the same thing in Illinois. And the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act, as we've been talking about, does that. Here's the specifics. And these are the specifics of the bill that's been introduced, including some amendments which will be introduced in the coming legislative session. So first, as we've talked about, the targets for divestment are the 200 oil, natural gas, and coal companies with the largest proven global carbon reserves. That's a lot of words, but this is an industry-tracked data set which is readily available to our funds, and it focuses our action on the largest and the most important companies in this sector. Bill calls for our pension funds to accomplish this in 2 stages. First, to immediately stop making new investments, and second, to divest existing holdings over a period of 5 years. You heard John talk a bit about the process that New York City went through. This 5-year period to fully divest gives the funds sufficient time to plan and to implement divestment in an orderly way, that does not harm the finances of the funds. The bill targets 5 state pension funds. These are the 5 public pension systems that are funded by the state of Illinois. This includes the teachers' retirement system, the state universities retirement system, state employees, the General Assembly, and the judiciary. In taking this action, we clearly are not alone. We've talked about New York, but Illinois would join not only New York City, but other public bodies across the country that have divested or are in the process of divesting or are considering divesting. Several states have passed divestment legislation, California, Maine, and Oregon in particular. A number of cities have divested, notably including the city of Chicago, which divested $70 million from their corporate funds in 2022. And outside of the public sector, a long list of large investors have formally removed fossil fuels from their portfolios. Here's a few of them, including a number of Chicago entities that you'll see, Loyola University, the Field Museum, the MacArthur Foundation, as examples here. And all of this adds up. At least 1,700 institutions with more than $40 trillion in assets have committed to some form of divestment. And we know these efforts make sense today, but their importance only grows when we take the long view. And as we know, pension funds take the long view. The risks of climate change, the risks of investment in fossil fuels only grow over time. Lower returns will compound, and as this quote from a leading analyst indicates, will have the greatest financial impacts on our younger workers who have decades to go before they can reap their pension benefits. So we believe, and we hope we've shown you, that fossil fuel divestment is a win-win-win proposition. It's a win for state workers, current annuitants, and future pension beneficiaries because it removes risky fossil fuel investments and helps protect their pension funds now and for future generations. It's a win for Illinois taxpayers. In Illinois, if the funds don't meet their interest rate targets, the state of Illinois makes up the difference. More secure investments mean less risk of a shortfall to be covered by taxpayers, something John mentioned as well. It's a win for Illinois. Divestment from fossil fuels, as we've talked about, further enhances our state's work and efforts as a climate leader. And it ensures that our investments are not undermining and working at cross purposes from our clean energy policies. And it's a win for the planet. Divestment reinforces the imperative that fossil fuels need to be left behind as we transition to clean energy. So all in all, Illinois can expand its climate leadership and protect the health of its pension funds. And at a time when the federal government has abandoned climate policy for the moment, these state level actions actually have even more importance in the country. So we hope that you will join us and help pass the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act. As Representative Guzzardi indicated, we will be working hard to make this happen over the next months. And there are several things you can do right now. You can sign up to be on our mailing list for updates. And when you do that, you can particularly let us know if you'd like to join one of our working groups, including our Faith Community Working Group or our Labor and Annuitants Committee. And for organizations, please consider signing your organization on as an endorser of this bill. You can get more information about this effort and about some of the background research and information that we have on our website, which is at climatesafepensionsillinois.org. And we're putting a link in the chat to sign up for more information or become an endorser. And with that, we are all happy to take your questions.
Hello, everybody. I am Larry Coble from the Climate Safe Pensions Illinois Coalition. There was a question in the Q&A, and it's can Mr. Adler say more about the surprising choice to use BlackRock as a consultant for studying fossil fuel divestment, given that BlackRock owns more fossil fuel investments than any other entity of its sort?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Let me say a couple things about it. First off, in terms of the idea that BlackRock owns more fossil fuels than any other company, I'll just say BlackRock owns more of virtually every company in the global publicly traded economy than anyone else because they are the largest, far and away the largest asset manager with about 12 trillion or so in assets. So yes, they own more fossil fuels. They also own more renewable energy. They own more agriculture. They own more of everything than virtually anybody else. So that's number one. Number two, the board's made this decision in 2020, and 2020 was when the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, first put out his letter saying climate risk is financial risk. And at that time in 2020, BlackRock, believe it or not, was a global leader in taking action on climate and on ESG more broadly. And in fact, the guy who ran the program for BlackRock, who ran the consulting project, was named Brian Deese. And if that name rings familiar to you, is because he went on to become President Biden's head of the National Economic Council, or one of those economic advisory groups in the Biden White House. So BlackRock was kind of on the cutting edge at that point when we selected them. I'll just say today, where BlackRock is also the largest asset manager for the New York City retirement systems, and you may or may not have seen that in November, the just departed controller of the city of New York, Brad Lander, who was my boss until last week, made a recommendation to these three boards that they essentially get rid of BlackRock as an asset manager because of their now real failure to take action on climate because they've reversed course so much since 2020. So anyway, in 2020, that was why it was just one of the three boards that selected BlackRock. All three used Makita, and then one of them also used BlackRock.
Okay, there's another question I have is pension
Yeah.
fund managers assert that investing part of their portfolio in volatile stocks is a good option to counterbalance their safe investments, which offer mediocre returns. Will divesting from volatile fossil fuel assets harm the fund's investment scheme?
Well, I mean, my response to that is that the reality is that really the only investments in the last say 5 years, the only investments that would have that if you hadn't made them would have harmed your portfolio is the big tech stocks, the so-called Magnificent Seven, which have totally driven stock market performance in recent years, especially in the last several with the AI boom. That the idea that you want highly volatile stocks to counterbalance, less volatile but lower performing stocks. I don't think there's any basis in reality for that. You really have to look at the sector or look at the stocks because low volatility does not necessarily mean low performance, and high volatility does not necessarily mean high performance. The problem with the oil and gas stocks is that they've been highly volatile and low performing over a very long period of time now, going back to at least 2010. And so I just don't buy that sort of theory. let alone how it's played out in practice. I think there was another question, which I'll take the opportunity to answer, just about if you say to managers that they can't invest in these stocks, does that mean that they lose the benefits of diversification? And again, what the studies showed is, look, all of these pension funds tend to be highly diversified by investing across both, the entire index of available stocks. Most public pension funds invest in indexes of U.S. and global stocks and across asset classes. So they invest in publicly traded equities and fixed income. They invest in government securities. They invest in private assets like real estate and private equity and infrastructure and so on. So they're already highly diversified. And what listen, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an academic, but basically what the academics say is that the benefits of diversification are most great at when you diversify to a certain level. But beyond a certain level, the benefits flatten out. So you can basically suffer from over diversification. But the main point there is that reducing diversification in a targeted way really does not reduce the opportunity set for asset managers to achieve the risk-adjusted returns that you're hiring them to achieve.
I do have another question, and
Yeah.
from Aaron. And what are the current positions of relevant agencies like the Illinois State Board of Investment and Illinois Treasurer's Office? Who would like to take that answer?
Can take it. And if anyone else wants to jump in from our team, feel free. So we're in discussion with, we have been and are in discussion with both of those entities. We have talked with the pension funds following the initial introduction of this bill. I will say they expressed a number of questions and some concerns related to implementation, related to some of the diversification issues that John just talked about. And we listened to their concerns, and we have proposed some amendments to this that are designed to clarify and to be extremely clear about which companies are being called upon to be divested from, because clarity was an issue that they raised, and focused it on the primary fossil fuel targets. That's our 200 largest companies. And so we are in the process of talking with the pension funds about these changes, and but we believe that they address the fundamental concerns that they expressed to us last year. The Illinois State Treasurer has not specifically opined on this version of our bill at this point. He has been in the past a strong proponent of shareholder activism, and as John pointed out, that is a very important piece of an investor responsibility, and one that we believe does not work very well with the fossil fuel industry. It can work well in other places. So we are continuing that conversation as well. Any additions?
So we have a question from Mike Bizanson. Can you clarify how many years Illinois has had 8 billion in losses impacted by climate change? Was it 25 years? Is there a case here for adding that cost into a post-investment analysis consideration for the boards?
Huh. I can't, so the data that we have comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And there's a wide range of climate related incidents, right? It includes droughts, floods, severe storms. The largest number is severe storms that affect different parts of the state. If they're very different in their uh, in their impacts and their nature, but they are very, very clearly accelerating in the state of Illinois in the 2000s. And I think we can expect. There's no reason we can't expect to see that high level continue. And so we all have to think about planning for that, right? This goes way beyond the pension funds. It includes, how does the state plan to help its residents with losses? What are the economic impacts on businesses and individuals in the state of Illinois, and how might we address that? There's a whole host of questions, I think, raised by the weather the weather impacts that we are already seeing.
Kathy?
Yeah, I'll just jump in here for a second, Jack Swenson with Climate Safe Pensions Illinois, to follow up on that point. Just to remind all of us, going back to Senator Johnson's original remarks, that in 2021, when we adopted CEJA, it was really the framing principle that as a state, we were being financially impacted by climate change, and that we had both a moral and fiscal responsibility, not just to state government, but to citizens throughout the state to move in a different direction. And each one of these climate incidents we talk about impact not just, say, infrastructure investment that becomes more costly to the state, but everything from crop insurance to community health. And while these are not the things that can be immediately solved by changing the way we invest in our pension funds, they are part of our responsibility as we move in that direction.
And Kathy, this is Jeff Green, also with Climate Safe Pensions. I put in the chat a link to the studies that support the data on the impacts of climate change on Illinois. So you can follow that link in the chat.
So a question is from Emily. Would Illinois Comptroller Susanna Mendoza have influence on divesting, in addition to passing a bill forcing to divest?
So the Illinois Comptroller would not have a role with respect to the pension funds. We have not explored to date any role of the state of Illinois in its current investments. But I think that is a role for the treasurer also, not the comptroller. If there's a expert on this up here, please chime in. I think the comptroller's primary job is to pay the bills, as opposed to making the investments.
Another question. This was from Stephanie. Has TIAA been responsive, or are they not a target company?
I can jump in here for a second on that. I mean, TIA is a investment fund that handles different different investments but it is not necessarily one of the funds that it would be governed by whatever rules are established by the pension boards of the five pension systems. And so that's where we're focusing our attention, really, is in establishing a set of principles by which the trustees would govern future investments by whomever they work with to make those investments.
And Larry, one of the participants have their hand up.
Oh,
I'm not sure.
Richard,
okay.
give me 1 second. I'll give you access to talk in one. Did he put his hand up? There you
Yes,
are.
you see it?
There you go. Richard, go ahead.
Richard, you're on mute. You can, if you have a question, or you could type it in the chat.
Hi, I'm not sure that I had my hand up, but I just had a couple questions that I'd put in the Q&A. One is just exactly where does the opposition to this come from politically, and particularly why? I mean, if you're a pension fund manager, I'm not sure you care because you know that your funds are in one thing or another. Um, is it the fossil fuel companies themselves that are opposing this? So where is it coming from? The other thing, I was curious about 200 seems an arbitrary number for companies, and 5 years seems an arbitrary time frame for divesting.
Mm.
You know, couldn't we be more than 200? Couldn't we be less than 5 years? Doesn't seem to be brain surgery to do either of those things.
Maybe I'll jump in and answer your second question first. And I think with all legislation, um, it is imperfect in the sense that it has to establish some set of rules by which in which we do something. And um, what has been called the Carbon Underground 200 is somewhat of an industry standard that is measurable, that has been um, that exists in the world for our pension investors to look to. So it becomes a benchmark that's easy for and that is transparent and easy for everyone to know what is inside and outside of. It's important from our perspective because it's not an arbitrary benchmark, but it is the 200 companies that control the greatest amount of undeveloped carbon, shall we say, in the world, which means they that every one of those that doesn't have the capital to extract more of what they own um, makes the biggest impact on moving us away from climate change. So there are many, many more companies that are engaged in some way in the fossil fuel industry, but these are the ones for whom their actions have the greatest impact. So that's somewhat of an arbitrary list, but it is 100 and it is very measurable, transparent, and definable. I think that's one thing. I think the other issue of 5 years is again a number that could obviously be negotiated and probably is different from in different circumstances, but it's a number that is commonly adopted in legislation like this, and one which financial managers have indicated is appropriate to make the kind of transition we're talking about. So that's those are the kind of two beliefs that we have used in moving forward with drafting the legislation as it is now. Um, and to your first question, um, I I guess you'd have to repeat it again.
Your question was, where does the opposition come from? This seems like such a great idea.
Uh, well, I'm going to answer that question by saying that I think the opposition comes from like everything else at this point, kind of the change is hard, right? Which is that and change is scary, and I think everybody wants to know that we're using the best information and we're making the best judgments in terms of establishing a framework for the state to move its pension investments in a different direction. And that's why we're doing the education we're doing here today, the education we do one-on-one with a lot of legislators. um, to demonstrate that this can be both fiscally prudent as well as climate safe to make the choice to move our pension investments in a different direction. Um, so I think the pushback that we have felt up to date is mainly the uncertainty that comes with needing to know more and understand better.
I would add to that, and maybe Senator Johnson would like to add as well, that because pension funds in the state of Illinois are a hot button issue, and we can't avoid that, right? We know that our pensions are underfunded, and so I think the key to overcoming worry and concern about this, as I'll say that, is instead of opposition, is making clear the case that taking this action doesn't expose our pension funds to future losses that might have to be made up by the state of Illinois. And we think there's the strong case is there, and we are prepared to keep demonstrating that case. But I think a lot of uncertainty and reluctance to jump in is because that's the thing we need to persuade our legislators that they're not doing something that would that jeopardize the pension funds. And we firmly believe that we would not be doing this if we thought that in any way this action would damage the pension funds. But that, I think, is the concern. Senator Johnson, do you have?
Yeah, Kathy, well said. That's exactly what I was going to say. And so that it is our job to make sure everything that Kathy said, that we help them understand it isn't going to add to the risk. And in fact, as we have been able to hear from the presentation, we're actually going to ensure that we don't have the financial risk in the future. But again, that is something that we have to do. We are ready to do it. We're going to continue to roll up our sleeves. I know in the chat, someone just said, we need to get this passed. I agree with you 100%. We want to do it. So, thank you all for joining us and being on the call and for your engagement. And we're going to need all of you and all of us here to ensure that we get the bill to the finish line.
Senator, I really appreciate those closing thoughts. And I know there's still a lot of questions bubbling up. I'm going to make sure we copy and paste these, make sure that our presenters have those available so we can do some follow-ups. But I highly, highly encourage people to join Climate Safe Pensions Illinois, to get involved, continue having these conversations with the group. I know they're meeting very consistently. We are going to need everyone who's available to get involved, even if your senator or representative is already a co-sponsor, is already leading on this. We would still appreciate your support to ensure that we are educating other folks within Illinois to talk to their members. So this is a very important piece of legislation to ensure that we are addressing the climate crisis that we're facing. So once again, really want to thank Kathy, Jack, Larry, and Jeff for helping answer. Mr. Adler, thank you so much for your time and giving us your expertise. And Senator Johnson, again, for being a leader here. So we will be distributing recording of this later, but really appreciate everyone for your time, conversations, and energy today.